All right. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the third webinar in the Clubhouse of Development webinar series. Today, we're going to be discussing event fundraising. Before I tell you a little bit about Cogeo and our speaker today, I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, you can use the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll review those after we go over the presentation and before we sign off. All right, let's introduce you to who we are. Cogeo specializes in sports-related 501c3 fundraising and organizational sustainability. Our work spans multiple sports within the nonprofit industry and geographical regions within the U.S. The Cogeo management team has 70 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $750 million for more than 200 nonprofit organizations. One key reason that we're passionate about working with sports and soccer clubs such as yourselves is that our executive management has both played and coached the game themselves. As a college All-American and highly successful soccer coach, Rob Cusell, who is your speaker today, is now the managing director of consulting services at Cogeo, and he has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. And with that, I will pass it to you, Rob.
Thanks, Mel. Hi, everyone. So as you can see from slide number 3, this is the third of 8 webinars. And today we're going to talk about events. And what we found is that most clubs, academies are doing events of some sort. The next slide, there are really 3 areas of focus for today in terms of goals and context. Learning how to be an effective bricklayer to make sure that your event is going to help your club and its sustainability in terms of revenue generation. And we'll look specifically at 3 events toward the end of the webinar. Why events are a cornerstone of fundraising, potentially, if it's done well. And then data. We're going to finish off with data because clean and organized data is really, really important to fuel the rest of the clubhouse. So the next slide is the clubhouse. And you can see where event fits in. It's retail. It's on the first floor. And it is a cornerstone of the house. And it fuels the second and third floor as well. Next slide. What types of events have we seen out there? Well, there are a lot of types of events for 501c3. Galas, signature events, breakfast, which is a call to action, generally an hour and a half. People filling tables, things like that. Fun run or walk, thon events. Golf tournaments, and generally those are volunteer driven. Somebody in your club is a golfer, and so she wants to host a golf tournament. Cultivation events, and we'll look at one in particular. Those are very effective for major gift programs. An open house, particularly if you have a facility, you can have them at the facility. And then campaign launch event as well as campaign completion events if you're in a capital campaign. So there are many types of events, not all of which are meant to directly fundraise. Some are, such as cultivation events and campaign launch events, are meant to celebrate and then educate as well. So there's all sorts of reasons why one does an event. So the next slide starts on that. Why are events important? Well, there are many reasons why they're important, potentially, as long as they're done well. Public awareness of the organization and the mission of the organization of the club. It gives you the ability to attract new members and then potentially have board member cultivation. You can attract new and incremental donors and then have data around those new donors. It's a great way to cultivate current, past, and new donors. And you can engage volunteers in terms of helping with the event. It helps you meet budgetary needs, particularly if you're raising significant funds during that event on an annual basis. And it also raises incremental funds. So it's non-sort of membership dues, playing dues funds. It's funds that you weren't really counting on, but now you have. And it's the opportunity to present a new and different image. If in fact you're merging 2 clubs, for example, great way to introduce the 2 clubs by having a community-wide event that really narrates and explains why the merger is occurring, and you're presenting the new face of the club. We're seeing that a lot, by the way, around the country, more and more. Good way to build internal community, and then to honor and bring in external community partners. It's a great way to do that. And it helps to advance the marketing and PR initiatives of the club. And if you do it on an annual basis, we highly recommend that you have an annual community award to thank someone in the community who's really making a difference for the club at whatever level, or board member. And then it's simply social. And now that we're coming on the tail side of the pandemic, it's going to be more and more important that these are done well if you're going to do it. So as you can see, there are many reasons, over a dozen, to consider doing an event if you're not already doing one. So why are they challenging, right? Because what we see, unfortunately, are a lot of events that produce a lot of effort, but simply don't produce the kind of funds and returns that merit those efforts, right? So they become challenging, and it's hard to validate them at some point. So whenever we go to contract with the client, one of the first things we do is do an audit of all the stuff that they're doing externally. Most of our clients have never fundraised, so that's not an issue because we're starting from scratch in terms of clubs. But they may have done an event throwing sort of spaghetti at the wall, or a volunteer may have driven an event. So we try and get a sense immediately of what's happening within the scope of a year. And generally what we find is that they might be doing an event, but there's a lot more work going into that event, that revenue being generated on the back end. So that becomes challenging. And what we end up doing is undoing events and getting them to actually consolidate, particularly if they have 2 or 3 events every year, consolidate down into one event potentially, unless they're heavily revenue producing and they're low impact in terms of resources that are needed. But anyway, let's look specifically why, again, over a dozen reasons why they can be challenging. Timing, because you're competing with other events. So the timing of the year is critical. Resources available. Again, we find that most clubs are lifestyle companies, therefore they're understaffed and they're just getting by year to year. So there's limited resources. Coaches are stretched, everybody's stretched, and so that becomes a challenge. And volunteers come and go, so that can't be relied upon. Leadership may not have the competencies to pull off an event, right? Soccer people aren't necessarily generally events people, although they're around events quite a bit with tournaments and things like that. Volunteer training and management. You got to deal with volunteers, therefore you got to train them and manage them properly for it to be effective. Otherwise, they won't come back the next year. Soliciting, whether it's getting sponsorships, corporate sponsorship, business sponsorships, or just straight up solicitation of in-kind giving for a raffle or whatever, that's got to be done, and that means work. So again, that can be challenging. Making sure that you've got the right invites, making sure that the guest list is complete and that you've got everybody that should be there, given what you're trying to accomplish with the mission of the event. Budget, it's got to be kept on budget, and that's got to be consistent. You've got to do record keeping, and therefore that means putting data into databases and making sure that everything is structured correctly. Generally, events need a decision-making structure. It's not horizontal. It's generally vertical. Somebody's in charge, and then others are helping on subcommittees and portions of the event. Communication can be challenging because you've got a lot of moving parts. Therefore, you've got to over-communicate. And then the back end of the event becomes really important, which is what do you do after the event in terms of recognition, both donors, volunteers, and anybody else who participate in the event. And how does the event integrate within your overall strategic planning and overall goal setting? And then most importantly, the last one is it's sustainable year to year. Is this something that can be accomplished on an annual basis where your membership is expecting it and they're really looking forward to it? It's going to make money. And so that's really important. So again, you just have to acknowledge that these things exist. And this is a really good checklist in terms of understanding the entire scope of what an event looks like in terms of undertaking. And by the way, no matter the event, these things happen pretty much. no matter the type of event you're running. So slide 9, I already mentioned this in passing, but there has to be serious analysis by the board of directors or the development committee of the board or the executive team if you're doing an event on whether or not it's worth it, right? Are you engaging people? Are they having fun? Is it something that's benefiting the club? Are you making money given the resources you're putting into it? Is it consistent year to year? Things like that. And then most importantly, if you're having more than one event, is that good? Is that really working for you from the standpoint of sustainability again? So next slide, number 10, is fascinating because bottom line is more than 3/4 of 501c3s, nonprofits, do an event, right? And here you've got two axes. On the y-axis, you've got ease of planning, again, sustainability year to year. So the most difficult is at the bottom and the easiest at the top. And then return on investment in a lifetime. So since the event started, over the lifetime of the event, how much has it raised? And again, the range is less than 5 million all the way up to more than 50 million. And so what does this graph tell us? That it's all over the place, right? That there's no consistency whatsoever in terms of the range of ease of planning as well as the ROI, return on investment. So you've got to be absolutely critical in terms of looking at your particular event and being brutally honest from an objective standpoint on where does it fit on the y-axis in terms of ease of planning, and then what's the return on investment given the ease of planning or not, which means difficult would be a lot of resources, easy would be turnkey solution year to year. But again, very interesting slide from the Nonprofit Research Collaborative. And again, this was a longitudinal study, obviously, that was done over a long period of time to assess the state of the industry as it relates to events. It's fascinating because this is exactly what we see with both our clients, past clients, and potential clients. They're all over the map. And our job is to bring them to the easiest of sustainability and the highest revenue possible. So let's now talk about, instead of talking about challenges and reality, let's look at best practices for all types of events. What we know is that there are 3 phases on slide 11. There's the preparation phase, the execution phase, which is day of event or days of event, and then most importantly, the event evaluation phase. So what does the event preparation phase entail? First and foremost, a strong and organized leadership team, because events are not horizontal, they're top-down. You need somebody in charge, and then subcommittees, given what you're trying to accomplish at the event. Committed donors, sponsors, and underwriters. And again, if you have a good sustainable event year to year, these come naturally and actually underwrite themselves from year to year. Committed set of volunteers and strong data management. And this is, again, in preparation phase for the event. And we're talking here about resources, okay, in terms of best practices. In terms of the event execution, there needs to be an absolutely detailed schedule and scripts to people who are actually going to be participating in the event, as well as meaningful donor and volunteer recognition. And then the evaluation phase, post-event, it's really around stewardship, thanking donors, thanking volunteers, making sure you get feedback so that you can do a survey, find out what people thought of the event, both the volunteers, the attendees, and anybody else who may have been impacted. And make sure you collect all and any event data, whether it's donations, transactions, in-kind giving, volunteer reports, etc. And then finally, creation of an annual event report that the board can review and analyze to ensure that you've got an even better event the following years. That's really important. So let's look at a few case studies. The next slide. So this is a really funny one because it was launched in February of 2020, literally 2 weeks before the pandemic hit and everything shut down. So it never happened. This is Villarreal, Nebraska Academy in Lincoln, Nebraska. And they were poised to engage their entire community. And they had a nice, ambitious goal. $18,000 for them is a lot of money. It's a small club. And as you can see, they raised $210. I think it was one player who got going early, and she was able to raise that much. And obviously, they returned it. But what this slide demonstrates is that it's an anti-paper solution, right? And everything is run digitally now online, which is really fabulous. Now, a soccer-thon is really a great thing for clubs because it engages the entire community, parents as volunteers, and daytime workers, the day of the actual thon, the players who are getting pledges from friends and families and committing to playing a certain amount of time to fund whatever they're doing. Then you can have add-ons like a juggle-thon, heading juggle, penalty kick contest. You can do a free kick contest and all sorts of other things that can be monetized. And the best part about a juggle-thon is that it can be done virtually, so that even if a family is not there the day of the event, they can still participate in the juggle-thon. But anyway, there are all sorts of things that can occur, and it's just a great way to celebrate the community, play the game in a different setting, in a non-competitive setting, all the while raising significant revenue for the club over the course of a day. And then generally we recommend that the day end with some kind of a celebration of the community award of the year, and so that then crystallizes the event and really creates great atmosphere. They're very effective. The next slide is post-pandemic. So this is Orlando City Soccer and Seminole Soccer down in Orlando and in Florida. And this event occurred in late March. So it just happened recently. And they actually fast-tracked it in terms of preparation phase. And obviously we directed it, but we only had about 8 weeks to prepare, which is not enough. But they did well. They engaged, I think, a good portion of their club and had some good results. They raised nearly $80,000, as you can see, $79,910, which was raised for the capital campaign and the revamping of Seminole Soccer Complex. And if you played there, you know how awesome that facility could be if it were fully turfed, fully lit, new stadium, and then a new indoor complex, which is what we're planning in anticipation of the World Cup in 2026. Now, you can see from this slide, I mentioned everything is now digital. Same goes for the reporting and for the registration, as well as the detailed reporting on the right. You can see that there was a competition by teams, and it looks like the girls 2010, 2011 pre-CNL girls, they won the competition by raising quite a bit, over 21. Looks like a lot of money. Fine print, so it's hard to read. But anyway, so this was well executed. Certainly, this was their first annual. So in year one, that's pretty good, right? $80,000. And the goal next year is going to be about 150 to 200,000. Just FYI, because now we have momentum. We did it and did it extremely well. And by the way, this was done in the indoor facility over a 24-hour period with a ton of volunteers and a lot of good. In addition to the money that was raised by the kids while they were playing, the 80,000, there were also corporate sponsorships and in-kind giving, incentives, things like that. The next slide is a really good example of how the San Francisco Elite Academy, which was founded in 2014 and was committed from the get-go to a lot of financial aid to ensure that none of the players that generally would flee San Francisco to play for the Earthquakes, San Jose Earthquakes, or over in the East Bay, which really there was an exodus of great talent until this club was created 7 years ago. But they knew that the only way they could attract and retain the best players was to have generous financial aid. So what we did was we really did focused on that. They had plenty of fields. So we really had to focus on creating a case statement that really spoke about economic access and opportunity and equality. And it really resonated with a lot of people. And to educate their constituencies, we hosted a number of cultivation events. And a cultivation event is really just finding a host, generally a couple, who host at their home or somewhere, and then they invite along with you a number of individuals, generally 20 to 30, so that you can have 10 to 15 people there or couples there. And it's really just an education on what the goals and intentions of the academy or the club are in that year. And in this case, as I mentioned, the focus was heavily weighed on financial aid. So what does a cultivation event look like? Well, there's a preparation phase, which is you want to find a leader, a host. There's messaging around the invitations, and then strong data management. In terms of the event execution, the host says a few words, invites the director of coaching or the technical director or the executive director to give a state of the academy or state of the club, and really just communicate anything that's in the case statement, because at that point the case statement is done, and you're selling. And then in terms of understanding what happens afterwards, you want to make sure that you're not really making an ask at that point. Some people will want to give because they've heard, but really the goal then is to steward each of the attendees by having an individual meeting with them, that where you engage them and really get them to consider giving and engaging. And obviously get all the data that occurred, anybody that attended into your database, and make sure that there's activity post-event. And what happens is you have immediate gifts that get generated, and then you can have subsequent meetings with the individuals that attended the events and have long-term conversations about their participation with the club. And what happened 3 years ago, after one such event, it turned out in the room there was a couple who had a private foundation, and the focus of the foundation, this is not unusual, by the way, focus of the foundation was just that, economic equity and opportunity. And their kids were in the club. And so they asked, how they could make a difference. And we explained to them that by funding the financial aid budget, it would relieve funds to go elsewhere, which would really solidify the impact of the club. Because the cost of living in San Francisco is high, so we have to pay the coaches more. And that really resonated with them. And they asked us to submit a proposal. We did. We submitted a proposal for over $600,000 over 5 years. And they committed to $500,000 over 5 years, which was a transformational gift because, as I mentioned, it allowed funds that had been budgeted for financial aid, because that really makes up almost the entire budget for them in a given year, because most of their players are not on financial aid. They were able to relieve that money and then do a better job in other areas. So it was really a transformative gift, all through a cultivation event. So what happens post-event and then pre-event in terms of leveraging technology, particularly as it relates to marketing the event? And this is very true of the soccer-thons. Soccer-thons have to be planned about 10 weeks in advance. And a big piece of it is the pre-soccer-thon marketing guerrilla push, right? And you have a lot of incentives to make sure that kids are going to participate. So right now, for example, we're planning a soccer-thon for San Francisco United, which is a different club from Elite. And they have a foundation. They're a for-profit club. We set up a foundation for them. And they're having their first annual soccer-thon on July 31st. So we just launched it. We just got the leadership together in the last 2 weeks. And now we're launching the event. And that really entails a lot of meetings with team managers, with coaches, to make sure that they're fully advocating that every kid needs to participate. We'll have incentives. Any kid who signs up will receive a mushy soccer ball. I forget, he called it something weird, but almost like a Nerf soccer ball. And then we'll have incentives for teams. Any team that gets 100% participation gets a pizza night, dinner night out for the team. The team that will have the highest fundraising will have a week-long camp opportunity also with a pizza night at the end of that week-long camp. So it'd be free week at camp for the entire team in the summer. So we're creating a lot of incentives at the front end to make sure that as many kids as possible are signing up. But there's several platforms that you can leverage, and there's some that are specific to soccerthons. Email, if you don't already use MailChimp or HubSpot, really important that you have that kind of system so you can track and see how many are opened, et cetera. And then any kind of social media scheduling beyond Facebook, obviously, can be very helpful. And then you'll need a posting plan in terms of your own social media engagement, and then, if necessary, a media kit. And then in terms of the next slide, 16, in terms of leveraging the technology as it relates to an evaluation of what happened, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you want to get feedback from all attendees, all volunteers, all donors. SurveyMonkey is a good tool. Analytics, and then make sure that you're improving your data over time, and that you're strategically making changes to future events as it relates to data and data management. Tracking everything is really important as well, particularly as it relates to donors, because there's generally higher volume at events because there's so many participants. So managing the data throughout is really, really important. Now, the good news, again, is the platforms that we put our clients on, they all are self-populating, and you know, it's your basic software that autofills, et cetera. So most of it is seamless, and because APIs are written into Salesforce.com, which is, you know, the CRM platform that we put all of our clients on, it's a seamless, really a seamless way to work. That's really strong. Okay, well, that's it for now. If there are any questions, Mel, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, I do have one. It says, based on COVID, is it too soon to start hosting events?
No, it's not, because well, I shouldn't say that. It really depends what state you're in, and you know what the current restrictions are in that state. I'm in Virginia here, and things are really good. I think we're the top state in terms of number of people vaccinated, et cetera. But no, we're definitely launching a number of soccerthons. We're launching another one in August in Springfield, Missouri, for Southwest Missouri Rush Lake Country Soccer. And then we're looking at a basketball thon, and again in San Francisco for a client, also in August. So I think if you push out to August, certainly by the fall, where you know they're talking about schools fully reopening, kids being vaccinated. My boy's 13; he's getting his second shot tomorrow. So things are moving rapidly now, which is a great sign. So the answer is you should plan now for an execution in the fall or late summer.
Okay, great.
Well,
And thanks so much for your
thanks,
time,
Matt.
Rob. Yeah, absolutely. And rolling off of that last question too, we actually are about to release a blog that circles around how to host a safe in-person event. It's not necessarily um, lined up with soccerthons, but it does have a lot of good resources and information in there about how to host a safe event. So I'll make sure to get that published and onto the Tennessee Soccer platform as soon as possible. And speaking of the Tennessee Soccer platform, we'll make sure that this webinar is up and available to rewatch by tomorrow. So thank you everyone for joining, and we will see you at the next webinar.